can no longer take care of themselves? Are you overwhelmed? This is Caregiver Solutions Info with Marcia Teele. Marcia will be hosting an hour of true stories and information, tips and updates of the latest research and necessary information in the caregiving field, focusing on you, the family caregiver. An Alzheimer's disease and dementia care expert, Marcia has 15 years of hands-on experience at Arden Courts, a leader in assisted living dementia communities here in the U.S. Marcia covers everything you need to know as a family caregiver, especially if you care for a loved one with Alzheimer's disease or other related dementia or chronic illness. If you have a friend or relative that is also a family caregiver, call them now. They won't want to miss a minute. And let them know they can watch on caregiversolutions.info. And they can listen on WNN 1470 AM in South Florida or nationally on the iHeartRadio app. Now, sit back, relax, and learn from our host, Marcia Teele, as she brings information to you that may just be the caregiving solution you need.
Welcome, everyone. Caregiver Solutions Show. I'm Marcia Teele, and thank you for joining today. Another wonderful program. The show is for you care to learn about the disease that your loved one has, especially if it's some type of dementia, and to learn to take care of yourself, things that you need to do to help you along your journey. So we have experts that come onto the show every week, give advice and wonderful information that you can learn from the experts. Through my years of working with caregivers, the last 20 years, I've met with thousands of caregivers and had to sit down face-to-face with them, and they'll start off by telling me their spouse or maybe their parent has dementia. And I'll ask them, well, what kind of dementia do they have? And sometimes I get an answer, and sometimes I get a blank stare. Like, what do you mean, Marcia? What kind of dementia do they have? The doctor said he just has dementia. Well, there's lots of different kinds of dementia. And dementia is not actually a disease in and of itself. It's describes symptoms of a possible disease. So it's important to find out if your loved one is said to have dementia, to find out what kind it is, because there's different ways to treat the different types of dementia. And there are so many of them. And we could never possibly discuss all of them today. But we are going to be talking about several more common types of dementia: Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, frontotemporal degeneration dementia, and vascular dementia. Those are some of the top ones, the more prevalent that we see. They all have different things that they present. They all have different ways that they're treated. They have different ways that you interact with the person who has that particular disease. Lots of differences. And so it's really important to understand what your loved one is dealing with so that you can better help them. And we have such a wonderful expert joining us today. He is a neuropsychologist. His name is Dr. Angelo Domingo, and he's a fellow trained neuropsychologist, and he specializes in teaching people how to cope with dementia, how to understand it, how to manage the caregiver along with dealing with that. He has his career actually helping caregivers understand what's going on, manage their loved ones more effectively. He is currently in private at Parkinson Place, which is a resource center, and that place is a free resource for people with Parkinson's disease and their care. And you're going to hear a little bit about Parkinson's disease. We're going to be talking about that. So I'm so excited to welcome to the show Dr. Angelo Domingo. Welcome, Doctor.
Hi, Marcia. Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm so excited that you're here today because this topic is so important, knowing what we're dealing with. Caregivers, they're so stressed out, they're overwhelmed when they get the diagnosis that their loved one has some memory issues. The doctor tells them, oh, it's dementia, but most people don't even think to ask them, well, what does that mean? What kind of dementia is it? How do I deal with it? And they just get a script maybe for a pill to go home and deal with it. So we want to explore that a little bit in detail today about the different kinds of dementia. And I had mentioned the 4 maybe top ones that most people actually are dealing with because some are more prevalent than others. And I'm so glad that you're here to explain that. So let's just start off with the differences, and we're going to take the top 4 just today, although, you know, there's how many kinds of dementias are there? I mean, it's unbelievable.
A lot. There are lots of different kinds of dementias. Dementia really is an umbrella term that simply means that a person is experiencing cognitive loss substantial enough that they can't function on their own independently. And then underneath that umbrella term, there could be about a dozen different types of possible dementias. So we had to limit our discussion today to some of the 4 major ones. Yes.
I mean, there's even dementia can be caused by even people drinking too much. I mean, alcohol-related type of dementia. So there's like you said, so many different kinds. But the 4 that we're going to be talking about today are the more prevalent ones that probably the majority of the caregivers are dealing with. And again, that's Alzheimer's disease, frontotemporal degeneration, Parkinson's disease, dementia, and vascular. So can you break it down for us? And what is the difference between these kinds of dementia?
Sure. So by far, Alzheimer's disease is the most common. And Alzheimer's disease, one of the hallmarks of that condition is profound memory loss. So the disease itself attacks the memory centers of the brain first and foremost. And so it can start off often with personality change, some paranoia, and rapid forgetting. So people can hear information, the same information repeated time and time again, and it's in one ear and out the other. It just never seems to stick. And so if you're caring for a loved one who's been experiencing some personality changes, some mild paranoia, sometimes hoarding behavior, they may hoard money or food, that's really a clear sign that it's probably Alzheimer's disease that you're dealing with. And another hallmark of that condition is a term called, and it's a very long word, but there won't be a quiz at the end, so no worries. The term, it's a Latin term, it's called a nos agnosia. And it's Latin for people who don't know what they don't know. So often with Alzheimer's disease, people's brains themselves tell them they're okay. I often hear from my caregivers who are caring for a loved one with Alzheimer's. They'll say, well, my husband or my wife or my, mother or father is in denial. It's not really denial. Denial implies that there's this complex set of psychological processes going on where the person doesn't want to look at the problem. Really, what you're seeing is a nosagnosia. Their brain is literally telling them they are fine, and everyone else has a problem.
So when someone who's suspected of having memory loss says there's nothing wrong with me, I'm fine, they really believe that. In their mind, they really are, and they're trying to convince everybody else that they're fine. And I think that's when a lot of people are very vulnerable at that stage, because they think that there's nothing wrong with them, that they can still do everything they used to do. And I've seen people who, get in cars to take a trip and they have no idea where they're driving because they don't have the memory, and they do things at this juncture that is possibly something that could harm themselves or harm others, right?
Exactly. And they'll get angry at their loved ones when their loved ones try to talk about the reality with them. So talking about the reality is often very, very tricky, and we'll get to that later. But you have to walk very gingerly into that territory.
Okay. Now,
mm-hmm.
How does Alzheimer's disease then differ from another kind of dementia? And I'd like to, talk about the symptoms and the behaviors to kind of compare them, because if there's someone who's listening today and they were never told what kind of dementia, this might be helpful to them. Not that it's a diagnosis, of course, we're not diagnosing anybody today, but that's going to help them and maybe help them ask their doctor the questions that they need to ask to find out more about what's going on.
So, in addition to the behavioral differences in Alzheimer's disease, there are also differences in scans, in neuroimaging. So, on an MRI, what you will often find with Alzheimer's disease is the temporal lobes, which are these lobes right here above our ears, okay? They degenerate first. So the patient's entire brain may be shrinking, but predominantly the degeneration is occurring right here, and the condition works its way from the rear of the temporal lobes, and it works its way up to the frontal lobes. In contrast, if you have a condition like frontotemporal dementia, often that's Alzheimer's disease in reverse. So it starts in the front and it works its way back. Frontotemporal dementia in many ways can be the hardest dementia for a caregiver to manage, because with Alzheimer's disease, people's memories are so bad, you can often be somewhat benignly manipulative because they don't remember, right? So if they say, well, I want to take my car out, or, what I often get is, I want to have sex now. And as a spouse, you say, I have a headache, or we can't take the car out right now because there's a thunderstorm, or whatever it is, they'll forget. But with frontotemporal dementia, because the condition starts in the frontal lobes and the temporal lobes are relatively spared initially, people's memories are too good for them to be fooled. So they'll say, that's not what you said. You told me X, Y, Z, and now you're lying. You're lying to me. So one of the hallmarks of frontotemporal dementia is often very pronounced personality change. People can get aggressive, they can get violent sometimes, or they can become apathetic and just not care about anything. And so to motivate them, or in contrast to rein them in, can be profoundly difficult, and often outside help needs to come in, or they need to be placed in a facility that can better manage that behavior. There's also vascular dementia, which interestingly can look like anything, because vascular dementia, which is the second most common type of dementia, by the way, behind Alzheimer's disease, So Alzheimer's disease makes up about 2/3 of the dementias. Vascular dementia can look like anything because it depends on where the blood flow is being restricted in the brain. Essentially, the term vascular refers to our blood vessels, and our brain runs on blood just like all the other organs in our body. And so as we get older, it's normal for us to experience a certain number of tiny blood vessels bursting. They're called TIAs, transient ischemic attacks. And you can see them on scans because they look like little bright spots on an MRI. And so if a blood vessel bursts, like a capillary, right? Because our brain is surrounded by capillaries, which are tiny, tiny blood vessels. It's equivalent to what's in the tip of our finger. If you've ever had, to have blood taken from the tip of your finger, you really have to squeeze to get a drop of blood out, right? Those tiny blood vessels are also surrounding our brain because our brain is never to come in direct contact with blood. Blood is toxic to our brain tissue. So the way our brain works around that problem is with these beds of capillaries. The membranes are so thin that oxygen and sugar can be passed into our brain and waste products can be taken up all through those membranes. The problem is those membranes are so thin that they can burst or they can get clogged up by plaque or fat. And if that happens enough, if enough of those blood vessels burst or get clogged, people start to notice that there's a problem. They're not remembering as well. They're not thinking as clearly. They may be confused because the brain can only do so much reorganizing and rejiggering of its blood vessels to keep the supply going to the necessary regions of the brain.
So when people have maybe a stroke, right, or a stroke or a heart attack or a brain embolism that goes up to the brain, that is something that's going to be bursting those capillaries and can cause this dementia?
Well, those are not just a major stroke is not just bursting capillaries. Sometimes an entire artery can get cut off. And it depends, a lot of factors go into someone's recovery. Someone can have a full recovery from a stroke and their cognitive function can return and look, almost as good as it did at baseline. But sometimes, especially in older adults, they may never fully recover from a stroke, especially a stroke to the middle cerebral artery, which feeds a large portion of the brain. There's a middle cerebral artery, an anterior cerebral artery, and a posterior cerebral artery. And that middle cerebral artery, when that gets blocked or there's a rupture, it can damage a large portion of the brain. Go ahead.
No, I just had a question. You mentioned something interesting. I just want to make sure I understand what you're saying because I think it's a lot of questions that people do have regarding the difference between Alzheimer's disease, dementia type, and this vascular. Because from what I hear you saying, the Alzheimer's continues to get worse. It doesn't really stop. It's a degenerative disease of the brain that just keeps getting worse. But a vascular type, we just heard you give an example where someone could have some memory loss, but they could actually get better, or maybe they're not quite as good as they were, but they're not going to continue to get worse. So that sounds like a really major difference between the two also, because with Alzheimer's disease, it just progresses, and it doesn't stop.
So That's a really complicated answer.
Yeah.
If people are willing to make really substantial major lifestyle changes, they can really slow down or even halt the progression of cerebrovascular disease, so vascular disease in the brain. But past a certain point, if people have enough brain damage, they don't know enough to be consistent with those lifestyle changes. They may not be on board with those lifestyle changes. So there's always sort of this push and pull between quality of life. I want to eat what I want to eat when I want to eat it. I don't want to exercise today. Versus long-term outcomes and preserving brain function. What you will often see in a vascular dementia is what's called a stepwise decline. So with conditions like Parkinson's disease dementia or frontotemporal dementia or Alzheimer's dementia, the decline is fairly steady. I'm having trouble doing that because it's in the reverse on my screen. So the decline is fairly steady. With a vascular dementia, there's a stepwise decline in the sense that there may be a stroke, a small stroke, and there's a decline. And then things might get a little better until the next stroke, and then there's another decline, and then things may get a little better until the next stroke, and then there's another decline. So it looks like a set of stairs. But I do want to reinforce that there is some hope with vascular dementia, that it can be halted.
Okay, but now let's talk about Parkinson's disease dementia, because when people think of Parkinson's, they normally think of people that shake, that have tremors, that maybe have difficulty walking and can't use their arms and legs as well. But a lot of people don't realize that then going forward, there could be dementia also with Parkinson's disease. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Of course. So Parkinson's disease dementia and Lewy body dementia are very, very similar. So when somebody manifests the motor symptoms of Parkinson's disease first, before they start to develop cognitive symptoms, they're often labeled as having Parkinson's disease dementia. If a person displays the cognitive deficits first, and then they develop motor symptoms later on, they're often labeled as having Lewy body dementia. But in essence, the conditions are very, very similar. So whatever I say about Parkinson's disease dementia can also apply in large part to Lewy body dementia. In general, Parkinson's disease dementia leaves people a lot more functional cognitively than the other types of dementias.
Okay.
Often there's an awareness that there's a problem with Parkinson's disease dementia, unless that dementia gets very advanced, okay, unless it stages rather quickly. People have a certain degree of preserved insight into their own problems. But that can be particularly frustrating for caregivers, because as a caregiver, if you have a conversation with your loved one and you explain something to them and they respond appropriately and say, yes, I understand, but then they go off and they do the exact same thing that they've always done, as a caregiver, it's very frustrating, because you're saying to yourself, we just had a conversation. You repeated what I said to you. You told me you understood. And now you just went and, you forgot your walker. or you didn't get out of that chair properly, or you didn't get out of bed the way we taught you to. It feels like they're doing it on purpose, or they're quote unquote lazy.
So with all of these different types of dementia, are there also different life expectancy times of the person who has it, as far as how long the person has the disease before they succumb to it?
So once again, with vascular dementia, that timeline's very variable. It depends on the severity, it depends on the progression, it depends on a person's lifestyle choices. With frontotemporal dementia, that tends to strike people who are somewhat younger. They can be in their late 50s, early 60s, sometimes even younger than that. And that progression can be fairly rapid. With Alzheimer's disease, the progression, the rate of progression, often depends on when the symptoms were first noticed. So if the onset is younger in Alzheimer's disease, the progression tends to be more rapid. If the onset occurs in older adults, then the progression tends to be slower. With Parkinson's disease, Parkinson's disease rarely kills people. They'll usually die from something else. So that progression tends to be rather slow. Lewy body dementia, if someone's diagnosed with Lewy body dementia or a Parkinson's dementia with psychosis, then that progression can occur much more rapidly.
So why is it so important for caregivers, family, to find out what kind of dementia that their loved one has? Because sometimes they don't know. And why is it important to find that out?
It helps us know what to expect. And it helps us to ask the right questions. It may be reasonable to expect someone with vascular dementia to remember certain things. It may be reasonable to expect someone with vascular dementia to respond positively to being cued. Oh, do you remember when we talked about blah, blah, blah? Oh, yeah, I remember that. But with Alzheimer's disease, it doesn't matter how much cueing you give to somebody. The information isn't in there. It may be appropriate to expect someone with Parkinson's disease dementia to behaviorally moderate themselves, manage their anger. But someone with frontotemporal dementia may be completely unable to manage their anger. So the label is important.
So what you're saying is, once we know and understand what kind of dementia our person has, it's going to help us be able to care for them better and understand why they're doing what they're doing, and then be able to manage that behavior. That's what I hear you saying, Doctor? Exactly. And that's why it's so important. So thank you for that explanation. That was excellent. We're going to take a quick commercial break. And when we come back, Dr. Domingo is going to share some of those behaviors of the different types of dementia and how you as a caregiver can manage that. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Arden Courts is not just a place to live, it's a place to call home. Residential living combined with quality caregiving. This is the philosophy behind Arden Courts. Communities created exclusively for individuals with Alzheimer's disease and related dementia who would benefit from a safe and structured environment. For additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides, call 888-478-2410 to locate a community nearest you. Inquire about our educational seminars, resource library, or support groups, or simply feel free to ask questions you may have about Alzheimer's and related dementias. At Arden Courts, we know, we understand, and we can help because memory care is all we do. Remember, call 888-478-2410 for additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides.
Welcome back to Caregiver Solutions Info Show. I'd like to take this opportunity to let you know about an offer that would be a great thing if you're a caregiver and you're caring for someone with dementia. Arden Courts is the national sponsor of this program, and Arden Courts is a leader when it comes to helping people with memory care. They have about 50 memory care assisted livings throughout the United States, and they help not only the person with the memory loss, but also the family and the caregiver by offering lots of different resources to help you on your caregiving journey. Today, they'd like to offer you this free book. It's called The 36-Hour Day. It's a wonderful resource for caregivers. I highly recommend it. If you don't have this book, all you have to do is send an email saying that you heard about it on the Caregiver Solution Info Show. Give your name, address, telephone number, and they'll be really glad to mail a copy straight to you. That email address is delray@arden-courts.com. Again, send an email. The email address is delray@arden-courts.com. And you can get a book and learn more about it. It's a wonderful book. You can read from beginning to end or pick chapters depending upon maybe what situation you're going through. But send an email and get this because it's a wonderful book. So today, special guest, Dr. Domingo. Dr. Domingo is a neuropsychologist and working about all things related to dementia and the kinds of dementia, why it's important to find out what kind of dementia a person's been diagnosed so the caregiver care for them. So Dr. Domingo, we've talked about Alzheimer's, Parkinson's disease dementia, frontotemporal dementia type dementia, vascular dementia. So once a person has the definitive diagnosis, after they've gone through the whole workup, everything that's involved in doing that, which we highly recommend, let's talk a little bit about some of these actual behaviors that can go along, and feel free to give examples because, you know, some real life stories. I know you have probably many to share, and what happens and how a caregiver can learn how to manage those particular behaviors so they don't go, you know, crazy themselves because, you know, thinking that, you know, I told you, you didn't listen, they repeat themselves. Once they learn how to manage a particular type of dementia, their caregiving efforts are going to go a lot smoother. Is that right?
Correct. And the most important thing to realize as a caregiver is that we're all works in progress. You know, we're all practicing. There's a reason why doctors open a practice, because we're always practicing and we're always learning. And as a caregiver, you're sort of opening your own practice too. Learning and evolving with your loved one's dementia. So it is perfectly normal at some points to get really, really frustrated, really angry, you know, to want to strangle your husband or your wife in a moment. Don't strangle them. But the desire to in a moment is understandable. What you want to be able to do is recognize that you're a human being and those emotions are expected. And you want to have a set of tools to be able to understand what's happening with your loved one and also to understand what's happening to yourself emotionally. So I guess we'll talk about the highlights, like some of the big behavioral issues that come up with each type of dementia. So with Alzheimer's disease, the most frequent dilemma that I see from my caregivers is their desire, the caregiver's desire to help their loved ones see the reality. No, you have this memory problem. No, you cannot drive. No, you can't go back to work. You can't take the yacht out today. You can't cook. They're never going to get that. No matter how much we argue or how much we explain, it's like trying to hold back the tide. The disease always wins. There may, early on in the condition, there may be moments where there is some recognition, that I have a memory problem. And we can use that as caregivers. So if you have a loved one with Alzheimer's disease who will acknowledge at times that they have a memory problem, then we can in that moment say, well, maybe it's better if I go with you someplace since you do have that memory problem. And this way I can help you out if that comes up. But if they insist that they're perfectly fine, then the task really becomes about redirecting them to something that's safer, or telling a benign lie. And there is such a thing as benign lying. We're lying to be kind. And the example that I use to help drive that point home with caregivers is, if you have an 8-year-old child and you find out that your husband is cheating on you, do you go and tell your 8-year-old child, I'm leaving your father because he's sleeping with another woman behind my back? No, you don't, because that 8-year-old doesn't have the emotional or cognitive maturity to process that kind of information. An 8-year-old cannot deal with that reality. And it's the same thing for your loved one. So, go ahead.
Yeah, it's so hard because they try to say, don't you remember? Remember when? And they try to push that point, and all it does is frustrate both of them, and it's a terrible thing. We got to go to a quick commercial break. We come back, we're going to talk more to Dr. Domingo about other dementias and some other things that are happening. So you don't want to miss it. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Arden Courts is not just a place to live, it's a place to call home. Residential living combined with quality caregiving. This is the philosophy behind Arden Courts. Communities created exclusively for individuals with Alzheimer's disease and related dementia who would benefit from a safe and structured environment. For additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides, call 888-478-2410 to locate a community nearest you. Inquire about our educational seminars, resource library, or support groups, or simply feel free to ask questions you may have about Alzheimer's and related dementias. At Arden Courts, we know, we understand, and we can help because memory care is all we do. Remember, call 888-478-2410 for additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides.
Welcome back to Caregiver Solutions Info Show. I'm Marcia Teele, and my guest today is Dr. Angelo Domingo, neuropsychologist out of Sarasota, Florida. And we're talking about different dementias, what they mean, why it's important to know what you're dealing with. So Dr. Domingo, you mentioned Alzheimer's, and the big takeaway that I hear from that as far as caregiving for them is to try some redirection, get them to do something else that might not be hurtful or harmful to them, and distract them from it. And a lot of people don't like telling lies, and I know it's a little white lie, but you call it a lie that's going to be a kind lie, right? Because if you tell somebody with the truth, I'm not going to believe you anyway and argue with you. And if you the sky is blue and they say no, you know, with the lot of it is just going with the flow and then changing direction, getting attention on something else, and that's what works really well with Alzheimer, right?
It is critical, and the other reason behind a kind lie is you don't want to re-traumatize someone repeatedly. You know, how many times can you tell someone, you know, mom's dead? Right? If you say, you know, your mom passed away, and the person goes, oh yeah, that's right, and they're okay with that, you know, they're not distressed by that, fine, then it's okay to be honest. But if that starts a whole grieving process, you don't want to institute that whole grieving process again day after day after day. That's traumatic. So it may be beneficial to say, oh, mom and dad are on vacation. You know, you remember they had that lake house up north. You don't want to say remember, but, you know, you just say, oh, yeah, they had that lake house. They're at the lake house. You know, whatever you need to say to preserve that person's sense of safety in the world and continuity. Now, if we shift a little bit and talk about something like frontotemporal dementia, often what's critical in that, with that condition is boundaries. As a caregiver, having very strict boundaries. It is not okay to speak to me like that. It is not okay to threaten me. You know, people with frontotemporal dementia often need a lot of structure, a lot of routine, which is beneficial across the board for all kinds of dementias, but particularly for people with frontotemporal dementia. And they need clear expectations. If they are being aggressive or they are violent, then what's important as a caregiver is to know when you can't handle this on your own.
And that's critical, because I've actually seen caregivers come to see me, and a woman, a wife, she was battered. Her face was black and blue because she didn't know how to handle her husband when he got aggressive. She tried to reason with him, and she couldn't reason. So, you know, it's dangerous at certain points to know how to get out and get help, right? Because I'm sure you've seen this many, many times through your years.
Yes, and you want to spend more of your energy trying to avoid an argument versus trying to win an argument.
That's good advice.
And that often comes up with Alzheimer's disease or frontotemporal dementia. If it's not something that's grossly inappropriate or dangerous, then my motto is let it be. You know, if they want to wear the same outfit 5 days in a row, then just buy them multiple versions of that same outfit. It's not worth an argument, and you'll never win that argument. So you want to de-escalate, and you never want to match somebody's agitation. The more agitated they get, the calmer you as a caregiver should get. Which is a hard thing to do.
You say, but hard to do. And that goes to caregiver stress. All caregivers face themselves in order to deal with the situation. Like, you know, and get so it's so insidious what we're talking about every different situation is different. No two people are going to look the same, be the same, act the same. And that's why it's just so confusing and overwhelming, I think, for caregivers, and why, they need to reach out for help. Because like you said, dementia has its own type and set of symptoms and behaviors. What about behaviors that are particular to the other dementia? We talked about Alzheimer's, we talked about frontotemporal. What about the others?
So vascular dementia, once again, is kind of a mixed bag. If someone is having small strokes in their frontal lobe, then their version of vascular dementia may look a lot like frontotemporal dementia. Versus if someone is having more strokes in their temporal lobes, then their version of vascular dementia may look more like Alzheimer's dementia. What's important to understand about vascular dementia is some days people are going to look really bad, especially if they've had an event like a small stroke. On a particular day, they may be especially impaired on that day, and then as their brain starts to heal, you may notice that they seem more like themselves. So you want to be able to take a quick assessment of your loved one each day, each morning, to see really where they're at.
I've actually had caregivers say, "Oh, he's cured. He's better. He got better. He's fine now. He was really bad, and I put him into a memory care unit, and they cured him, so I'm taking him home." That is not the case. It's just because some days are better than others.
Right. A good day is a good day, and that's all it is. And a bad day is a bad day, and that's all it is. It's important to recognize that these conditions are ever changing, especially vascular dementia. So if one day happens to be terrible, don't despair that every day is going to be terrible. And if one day happens to be great, don't get your hopes up and think that every day is going to be great. You really have to meet your loved one where they're at in that moment. Especially, in the case of vascular dementia, if they're having frequent strokes. With Parkinson's dementia, that's rather different from the other types of dementias, because
why the smile? Why the grin? Why the grin when you talk about Parkinson's?
Well, I really love working with my Parkinson's clients because they have a level of insight that just isn't there with my other clients who have dementia. So there's that. I have an affection for them. But also, it's fascinating as a neuropsychologist to see how they can work around a problem. If you think about your brain as a business, with Alzheimer's disease and frontotemporal dementia, it's as if all the executives have left that business and there's no one there to make any decisions. You have support staff, but no one there to give direction, nobody there to steer the ship. With Parkinson's disease, the opposite is often the case. It's as if all the executives are there, but all the support staff has left the building. So as an example, in my other line of work, I work for a major disability company reviewing claims. I have an entire support system there. They find the files for me. They send me the files. They tell me exactly what my schedule is going to be. They tell me exactly what I need to answer when I look at the files. If I had to do all of that on my own, I'd be so overwhelmed that I wouldn't really be able to do the decision-making work. And that's what it's like to have Parkinson's disease. That type of dementia, especially when there's no psychosis involved. Sometimes there is psychosis involved, and that's a different can of worms. But typically, with your standard Parkinson's dementia, people's reasoning abilities are relatively preserved. It's just that they can't juggle all the information in their head at the same time. So they may come to what seems like a reasonable conclusion to them with the information they can hold in their head in that moment. Do we have time for me to give you an example?
Well, we have 5 minutes left, and we can do an example, and then I want you to share how people might be interested in contacting you if they have questions, if they're in the Sarasota area and they want to, meet up with you. So, yeah, go for it.
Okay, so I had a client with a prototypical Parkinson's dementia. He was a classic case, and the condition was very advanced, and it took him 20 minutes to go from the door to my couch. And my office is not that big, but that tells you how advanced the condition was. So he sat there, and I asked him, we'll call him Jim. I said, Jim, what do you want to talk about today? And he said to me that he wanted to discuss driving and I could see that he had really thought about this. People with Alzheimer's disease will often say, well, I'm a perfectly good driver. They could have mowed down 5 people on the way to my office and, crashed into a couple of signs, but they still think they're fine. He said to me, I haven't been behind the wheel in many years. And I just want to see if I can do it. So I was thinking, on a Sunday morning, going really early, going out with my wife to an empty parking lot so nobody's there, nobody can get hurt, I can't hit anything, just to see if I can do it. And if I can't, my wife will be in the car with me to take the wheel. He had really thought this through. And then I said, well, Jim, you can't lift your head up. Your head is perpetually down. Because of the Parkinson's, he can't pick his head up. So you really can't look out a windshield. And he thought about it, and he thought about it, and he said to me, you're absolutely right, I can't. I didn't think about that. And that's the hallmark of Parkinson's dementia. People don't think through an entire problem because they just can't hold it all in their head.
Wow, that was a really good story, because I was following you all the way through, and I was waiting for the end, and it's almost like a surprise ending, because he physically could not do it. In his mind, he figured it out, right? So there's so much to learn. So Dr. Domingo, there's so much to learn. Caregivers can tap into resources that the Sarasota area and they want to contact you. How can they do that?
So they can contact me through my website, which is angelosdomingo.com, or they can contact me through my email address, which is angelosdomingo@angelosdomingo.com, or they can simply give me a call. My number is 941-822-6122. And if I may say, through the wonders of teletherapy, I can see anybody in the state of Florida, not just those people in Sarasota. Yeah.
You're absolutely right. We have to take into account, working with the pandemic and doing all the wonderful technology. So thank you so much for being with us today. I'm sorry we're out of time. I had so much more I wanted to ask of you. Maybe you'll come back and share with us another time, because
I would love that.
Well, I would love to have you. You're such a wealth of information, and you can feel the passion. I can feel the passion coming through that you have for your clients, and they're very lucky to have you for help. So thank you again for being on the show.
You're most welcome. Thank you.
And thank you all for tuning in. Be with us next week, same time, same place, 6:04 p.m. every Tuesday on caregiversolutions.info and on the iHeartRadio app under WNN. Thank you all. Have a good night and stay safe. See you next time.
Thanks for joining us for this week's Caregiver Solutions with Marcia Teele. Join us next week as Marcia, who has 15 years of Alzheimer's disease and dementia care experience, brings you more needed information to help with the care of your loved one. This show can be seen again on caregiversolutions.info, and questions can be left on the site, which may be used on the program to help others. See you next week for more